Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to East Central Missouri and the world, and welcome to the James Strong Show podcast number 373. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for making us a part of your day. I appreciate it. This podcast was recorded on the afternoon of Friday, August the 23rd, from the James Strong Studio in Western St. Charles County. Topic of today's essay: do as I say, ... Now, why did I call it that? I thought about saying, do as I say, not as I do, but you know what? That's a saying that is a million years old. Do as I say, ... just gives you the inference that it's do as I say, not as I do. But the topics of today's essay, the individuals featured in today's essay, actually aren't saying do as I say, not as I do. Because they're just saying, do as I say. And the subjects of today's essay are groups of politicians, a journalist, a plain old everyday person, and a couple of CEOs. And they're not saying do as I say, not as I do. They're just saying do as I say. I know better than you. I'm smarter than you. I'm fill in the blank. And it's almost based in arrogance, I find. When somebody says do as I say, not as I do, there's a little bit of, what's the word? Modesty in there. Saying, look, my situation is kind of unique, so what I'm saying is the way it needs to be, but I don't do it because my circumstances are just a little bit unique. The topics of today's essay, when these folks say, do as I say, their circumstances are not unique. And if they would say, do as I say, not as I do, they would be laughed into oblivion. So they're just saying, do as I say. And the not so funny part is more and more is what you're getting is the people who are around you, the people who are captains of industry, the people who are the politicians that run the country, even the common Joe are just saying, yeah, do as I say, because I don't want to do it the way you want to do it. And America was founded in individualism, which I'm a big fan of individualism because those of you that know me know that I am a quite unique individual. However, you can't be an individual and make yourself an island and then say, look, I'm a unique island and everybody needs to listen to me. That's how things have changed. So we'll get into this essay. Do as I say. But first, couple of things this week. Quite a full week this week. Spent the early part of the week working on the old Jaguar. And believe it or not, I think I've got the wiring just about licked on this car. And you think to yourself, you've been working on this thing for months, which is kind of true and kind of not. I took a couple months off to do other stuff. Mainly because I ran into so many roadblocks on this thing with the wiring that I was just at an impasse. And I thought, you know what, time to just walk away from it for a while and come back later. I came back to it and I got to the point where I was still scratching my head thinking, wow, I still can't get this. I'm missing something. So I went back to the guy who did a lot of the body work for me over at It's Alive Automotive. And because he's got an old Jaguar Mark 7, same year as mine, sitting out back. So I said, look, can I come by and bend your ear? He said, sure. So I came by, started talking to him. And he said, yeah, those cars are difficult. Your best bet is to just buy a brand new wiring loom and start over. I said, well, that's what I did. He said, yeah, and if you've got a wiring, get yourself a wiring diagram and just follow it where it says. I said, I've done all that. He said, then why are you here? You're doing everything right. I said, nope, I'm not doing everything right. I can't get there from here. There's too many wires on each side of the firewall. I can't get them through the holes. I can't figure out how they hook up. I just can't get there from here. So I said, how do you do it? And he smiled because he had a couple of XKs back there. He had several XKEs, the the roadsters. That's his specialty. And he said, well, let me show you this XKE. He said, this wiring is difficult on this thing. He said, we got a few little cheat sheets. He said, but primarily, we just copy off of the other one. Here's one that's complete. This one's not. Do like that and you'll be fine. I said, okay, well, great. You've got a Mark 7 in the back. Can I go copy off of it? He said, sure, go ahead. He also shared with me that there's a jump box that I didn't know what it was for. He said that jump box is to marry your loom that goes on one side of the firewall to the loom that goes on the other side of the firewall. And then it made sense. And then I took pictures. I thought, where do the extra wires go? They can't run in front of the voltage regulator or the fuse box or the jump box. But there's spacers on these things that I didn't put in. You put the spacers in and the wires can run behind them. So there you go. I installed the spacers, spent 9 hours, Monday rewiring that thing, and I'm about 80% of the way there. So well on the way to getting this thing done. Finally, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. Those of you in East Central Missouri know that we had marvelous weather on the 20th, 21st, and 22nd of August. Highs about 80, lows in the 50s. It may have touched 49 one morning because it was cold. The hiking and the fishing were just wonderful. The camping was fun too. There was nobody in the park because kids are back to school. It's the middle of the week. Who's going to be going camping? Almost nobody. So I had the place almost to myself, believe it or not. Perfect weather. The fishing was different. Normally when I go to Klondike, I catch as many fish as I wanted to. But this time I caught three fish in 2 days. And you think, well, that's not much. And it's not. However, one fish was just an average size panfish, about the size of your hand, a bluegill, I guess you'd call it. The other two, one was a 15-inch bass. I had never caught a 15-inch bass before, believe it or not. It was huge. The biggest bass I've ever caught. It was fantastic. The other one was a crappie that was about 8 inches, at least 8 inches long, probably longer, close to 9 inches long. This one was a huge fish. So and then I've never caught a crappie that big before. So yeah, the fishing wasn't great. I didn't catch a whole lot of fish, but that happens in late summer sometimes. The fish just aren't really interested. And there's a lot of weeds and stuff in the lake, so it makes casting more difficult than normal. But I caught the biggest fish I ever caught. So I guess all in all, I had a good fishing trip, and just camping is just relaxing for me. So had a great couple of 3 days, and now it's Thursday. Actually, I know it's Friday, and it's time for a podcast. And we're going to get right into the essay then. Do as I say. This week, I think last night, in fact, the DNC, the Democratic National Convention, wrapped up in Chicago, and they nominated Kamala Harris as their nominee. I will say I watched zero of the convention because I'm really not interested. And before you say, well, you're just a biased Republican, well, I watched zero of the Republican convention either. There's absolutely nothing that interests me in any of these conventions. And these people are probably, both Republicans and the Democrats, are probably the most do as I say people you'll ever meet. I did see sound bites of some of the speeches, and they were good speeches from a presentation standpoint. Good speakers, good diction, good communication. But the message is just laughable. When you have people like the Obamas who are they worth $100 million? If they're not worth $100 million, they're worth something close to that. The Clintons, tens of millions, perhaps hundreds of millions of dollars. When they start standing up there telling you what they're going to do for the average person, because you know what, we're just like you, it's laughable. It's a do as I say moment. And again, the Republicans are no different, but the Democrats once upon a time were the party of the people. If those of you who are old enough to remember, Missouri used to be a Democratic state. There were very few Republicans elected in the state of Missouri. But they were the old school Democrats. They were the Tom Eagleton Democrats. They were the Dick Gebhardt Democrats, the Robert Young Democrats, the Ed Dirk Democrats. They were fiscal liberals and social conservatives. And what I mean by that was basically these guys, they were big union guys, okay? They were pro-union, pro-labor, okay? But they're also pro-life. And they thought taxes needed to be a bit higher because social services help people, okay? But they were virtually all pro-life. To have a pro-choice politician, Democrat or Republican, in the 60s, even the 70s, into the 80s maybe, was just something that wasn't done. Definitely into the 70s. It just wasn't done. Because how could you support a candidate who thinks it's okay to kill babies? But the party has changed. And they've become a party of people actually richer than the Republicans. The Democrats outspend the Republicans in national national races all the time. They're the ones with the big money behind them. So when you have the big money people saying, look, I'm for the little guy, nobody buys it. So that's okay. You go over to the Republicans because they're going to go ahead, and they've generally been the party of, you know what, take care of yourself and let yourself do what you want. Well, they're not that way either. Taxes were raised and the debt was increased under the last Republican President Trump, like no other before it. So they're all the same. And it just makes you think they're all saying, do as I say. They're not even saying do as I say, not as I do, because we all know that they're a bunch of charlatans. But the politicians lead the way in do as I say. But they're by far not the only ones. In fact, they're not even close to the only ones. Remember a while back, this was probably 2, 3, maybe 4 or 5 weeks ago. I lose track of this stuff. There was a guy in the Wall Street Journal named Christopher Mims, big proponent or a proponent of electric cars. Now, let me preface this by saying is I am not anti-electric cars. In fact, I think electric cars are wonderful in many cases. The best case, I think, is the Amazon vans that come to the neighborhood every day, made by Rivian. That's perfect. These things run on a charge. They park them at night. They recharge them, and then they run them again. They burn clean. They're easy. They're not loud. There's a place for electric vehicles. And I think as time moves on, electric vehicles will eclipse the ICE vehicles because they have the potential to be better. And they'll continue to get better. Whereas the ICE vehicles are probably about as good as they're going to be. Okay. But this Christopher Mims was talking about how these electric vehicles are just wonderful. And the cases he made, I'm scratching my head thinking, buddy, you don't know what you're talking about. It wasn't that he was giving misinformation, but he's making assumptions that everybody lives in a house and nobody drives only so far to work. And he doubled down on this. In fact, he doubled down on this saying, look, I wrote an article a while back and I've since bought an EV. He bought a Kia EV9, high-end vehicle. Okay. First of all, this vehicle runs about $90,000. So let me ask you a question. Those of you listening to the sound of my voice, how many of you can afford a $90,000 vehicle? Sure, I get it. You're going to save fuel costs in the long run, but it's $90,000. $90,000. That's a lot of money, friends. And it says, look, it's a great car. It's got a 100 kilowatt battery, twice the size of the Tesla Model 3. And you know what? The good thing about this is you don't even have to have a special charger. You can just plug it into the 110 outlet in your house. Okay, he piqued my interest. I'm going to read on. In fact, he says that he knew that surveys show EV fans generally love the experience of charging the vehicle at home, as long as they pay hundreds of dollars for a dedicated level 2 fast charger, and even more to have it installed. Well, first of all, they're not hundreds of dollars. They're a couple $1,000s. So I don't know where he's getting this thing. Okay. But the fact is, he said, look, with this thing, I don't need a fast home charger at all. In fact, with my charger, I just plug it into the wall. I thought, well, this is fantastic. And I'm thinking to myself, well, shoot, if you just take this thing and plug it into the wall and there's no extra investment, this thing's great. But then he goes on. He says, you know what? Even this thing charges just fine overnight. In fact, even on the days where I have to drive more than 30 miles a day, there's plenty of charge. I think, wait a minute. On the days you have to drive more than 30 miles a day, 30 miles a day is nothing to almost everybody. And you can't, and what you can't do is say, well, Strong, I only live 14 miles from work, so 14 is 28. So yeah, I'm good. I don't drive any more than 30 miles a day. And you never get stopped at a stoplight. And you never have to run an errand on the way home. And. Friends, you can't say, yeah, I'm good. 30 miles a day, 2 miles to spare. You can't do that. You absolutely can't. Oh yeah. And you really can't run the air conditioner on 30 miles a day either. But he doubles down again. He said, look, this is just fine. I have what they call level 1 charging. It works just fine. And he states the fact that the average American does travel more than 40 miles a day, according to one estimate, but that varies a great deal. And what he's saying is, look, if you do the averages, a whole lot of people only travel 30 miles a day or less. And research shows that roughly half of Americans take trips over 150 miles only 4 days or fewer per year. Now, let's just say he's right. Okay, now personally, I've taken a 150-mile trip. Now, it's one thing to say I'm going to get in the car and drive 150 miles away. It's another thing to say I'm going to go from western St. Charles County into the city of St. Louis, and then down into Jefferson County, and then back up into North St. Louis County, and then back home. Now, that's not a large trip. It's still staying in the metropolitan area, but that's going to be more than 150 miles. So is that a trip? And plus, it's, look, you only do it 4 times or fewer per year. So 4 times a year, you can't use the car. So what do? Well, you have an extra car. Okay, well then, so you got to have 2 cars, not just one $90,000 vehicle. You have to have a $90,000 vehicle and a spare for those days where you really want to drive more than 30 miles a day. It's not practical. The other thing, he said, look, you don't need a fast charger. Just charge at home. In fact, he's saying, look, America's charging infrastructure, it's not even a big deal because 60% of all Americans live in detached family homes. So that's most of America. So you can plug it in. Friends, what about the other 40%? The other 40%, okay? That's a lot of money. What's 40% of 300 million people? Quick. What was that? It would be like 330 million. So it's about 150 million, okay? Because there's 330 million Americans. About 150 million Americans don't live in a detached house. So if you have an apartment, you can't plug this thing in because you're parking maybe 100 feet from your house. You can't run a plug. Now, this guy's actually saying, well, just run an extension cord. You can't run an extension cord across the parking lot at an apartment complex. Is he insane? Do as I say. Look, just do as I say. Now, there's one other thing that he doesn't even go into. The charging, where you plug this thing in. I'm going to read this because you're going to think I'm making it up if I don't. This guy says, for my experiment, I parked my Kia in the driveway along my house and attached a charging cord that came with the vehicle to a standard extension cord that reached the outdoor outlet by my front door. He's saying all this with a straight face. When I first plugged it in after a long day trip, which I almost completely discharged the battery, the vehicle helpfully informed me that it will only take 70 hours to fully recharge the battery. It seemed like a disaster, but it really wasn't, because as it turned out, overnight the vehicle had added 15% capacity. In other words, it had added 40 miles of range, and I only needed to drive 30. So I'm good. 70 hours to fully recharge a vehicle. If your car is done and you plug it in at the end of the night, and then you get up in the morning and you've got 40 miles of range to go on it, who feels good about that? I can't think of anybody that would feel good about that. And this guy says this with a straight face. Now, he does mention that, prices are falling, and that is true. The main reason prices are falling, there's two reasons. Technology is increasing, which is true. But nobody's buying these things. And they've got a glut of these electric vehicles on parking lots, and they got to sell them because nobody wants to buy them. And what's the biggest way to sell something that nobody wants? That's right. You drop the price. So this guy's article, it just, do as I say. See, we can have all electric vehicles. I've proved it. This article, which was well written and thoughtfully done, I have to think, Christopher Mims, when you're saying do as I say, you haven't a clue as to what you're talking about. I can't imagine that he convinced anybody that an all EV fleet in this country right now would be a good idea. It was almost like, okay, this was out of the Wall Street Journal, not the Onion. But when you say do as I say, and then you throw in facts like this, at least the guy didn't lie. I'll give him that. He threw out their facts, but it was bizarre. It was just bizarre. Story number 3. Let's not talk about politicians. Let's not talk about journalists. Let's talk about plain old folks, okay? Plain old people. And people get into trouble, and people overextend themselves. People make bad financial decisions all the time. Everybody does. I have, you have. The trick is just keep them to a minimum. So you think to yourself, and there's a mindset today that if we could just get rid of student debt, all these people would be okay. And there are cases where people picked up way too much student debt for degrees that they'll never really, even if they do use them, they'd make more money than if they worked at Lowe's, okay? But you know what? People make bad choices. And let's just go ahead, eliminate the student debt. But this article talks about the vast majority, or at least many of these people who had their student debt erased, it didn't fix their financial problems at all. In fact, so far, almost 1 million people have had their student loans eliminated through the federal government's Public Service Loan Forgiveness Program. The average balance, $92,000 when they were cleared. Now, nearly 2 million more had their student debt erased through programs for disabled borrowers or under income-driven repayment plans. So that's 3 million people almost. That's a lot, okay? And another 1.3 million with 20 billion in loans have been approved for discharge through a program aimed at students who were misled by colleges about things such as job prospects. That's another story for another day, okay, where there was actually deceit and dishonesty involved. But they talk about this one particular family, and basically, this is someone who's, this is just kind of the way things are. Anita Walker is her name. And she borrowed $36,000 in the 90s to help get a graphic designs degree at the now defunct International Academy of Design and Technology. Now that she didn't pay it, and it doubled. In fact, it went from $36,000 to $82,000 because she wasn't paying the bill. So in February of last year, 2023, she received a letter saying, look, she's just going to have her loan discharged. The balance, $82,000, was wiped clean in May of this year. So her problems are gone, right? Wrong. Her problems aren't even begun to be solved. In fact, she said, look, I don't have this debt, so I can now get a mortgage. I can buy a house. But here's the problem. Look back to the loan that she had from the 90s. She never made a payment on it. Not one. So forgiving a loan that she never even paid, friends, that's a bill that she was never paying to begin with. How did forgiveness of that loan make any difference at all? And it didn't. And now here's the problem, the biggest problem. So she's still in trouble. She still has no money. She had her debt erased, but still has no money. In fact, her son, he went to college on a partial football scholarship. So what did he do? He took out a student loan. Come on, folks. Do as I say. Look, just forgive my student loan and everything will be fine. That's the average Joe talking. Well, friends, if you're not making the payment on your student loan, how does that put more money into the kitty? And did these people learn or didn't they learn? And you can think to yourself, well, they're just big dummies. They didn't learn anything. Or did they? Did the son say, look, I just made the same mistake that mom did. I borrowed money that she never could pay back. Or did he say, you know what? I may as well just borrow this money because mom never had to pay it back and neither will I. It's do as I say. Just forgive my student loan debt and I'll be fine. But again, the only way to get ahead is to make more than you spend. And she wasn't spending for the student loan. She was just letting it accrue. Interest. And it just got bigger and bigger, but she was never making the payment. So it was never affecting her bottom line. It was just erased. Now, what should have happened, in my opinion, is the bank should have just said, well, you shouldn't have made this loan. And the bank just takes it takes it in the shins, takes it in the shorts. Okay. But it didn't happen. And that's just an average Joe, Josephine, I guess, in this case, because it was a lady. But that's another case where it's do as I say. Look, just forgive my student loan and life will be good. The student loan was forgiven, and it's the same old, same old. It didn't help anything. The next two instances of do as I say have to do with CEOs. Once upon a time, if you looked at a company who was just the bellwether of manufacturing, it was Boeing. In fact, when I was a boy, I grew up near the airport, and a lot of people worked for McDonnell Aircraft. McDonnell Aircraft merged with Douglas Aircraft. I think McDonnell Aircraft was they were the aerospace and defense end of it, and Douglas was the commercial aircraft end of it. So they merged, McDonnell Douglas. Then Boeing bought McDonnell Douglas, okay? And until fairly recently, Boeing was just, they were the best airplane makers in the world. Their passenger planes were second to none. Their defense planes, second to none. I mean, McDonnell Douglas, Boeing went into space. But look where they are now. I mean, they sent that space shuttle up and dropped off those astronauts, and now it's broken and they can't fix it. They can't get those people back. They were supposed to be up there for weeks, a couple of weeks, okay? Now they're saying, yeah, we think we might be getting you back in February. And it's not because we fixed this shuttle jet. It's just because SpaceX will have a guy coming up there in February. So it went from months to maybe years of having these people up there. The 737 MAX, they would crash because of a software problem. Now, the newest problem they have is there's cracks in the structure of the 777X. Okay, this is their big wide-body jet. And you think to yourself, how did this company go so bad so quickly? And of course, never will they raise their hand and say, you know what? It was our fault. We screwed up. We didn't do things well. No, they say, no. It's all these subcontractors. Well, friends, nobody put a gun to their head and had them subcontract this work. Boeing made a conscious effort to subcontract this work because it was done cheaper. And they had an obligation to reject the work if it wasn't done correctly. I worked in manufacturing for many, many, many years, and most manufacturers have subcontractors because to do a project, sometimes you can't do everything. You don't have the right machinery. You don't have the right equipment. You don't have the right know-how. Some special tasks take machinery or resources that are only available in a handful of places throughout the whole country, and you got to use vendors for that. That's just how manufacturing works. But you can't blame it on a vendor, because if it comes in and it's wrong, you got to go back to the vendor and say, sorry, Charlie, this ain't right. Do it again. But I read an article about Boeing, and they recently got a new CEO. And I read a story about the old CEO. And I just assumed, I made an assumption that the CEO lived in Seattle, because that's where Boeing headquarters are. That's where most of the manufacturing goes on. Or maybe even South Carolina, because a lot of it goes on there too. Nope. The Boeing CEO lived in Southern California because that's where he wanted to live, which, I mean, it's a cooler place. And he made hundreds of millions of dollars a year, so he could afford it. So he was, air quotes, working from home. Now, is it a coincidence that the guy who runs the show at Boeing worked from home, so he wasn't on the shop floor? He wasn't present in the meetings. Now, okay, well, he did Zoom meetings. Okay. Let me share something with you about a Zoom meeting. I've done them many, many times, and they're fine for some things. But in a Zoom meeting, you can't read someone's face. You can't see an emotion. You can't ask a follow-up question all the time because you're just not there. A Zoom meeting is a phone call on steroids, and you can't run a company on the phone. This guy was running the company on a Zoom, on a phone, working from home. Is that why Boeing all of a sudden can't make airplanes? Well, the guy who runs the show doesn't care, so the second in charge doesn't care. Second in charge doesn't care. Why should the third in charge care? On the camping trip, ran into a young man. And a couple times I ran into him, usually in the mornings, cleaning up, getting ready for the day. So he asked me, I was packing to go home on Thursday. He said, you're going home. I said, yeah, it's time to go home. He said, yeah, I'm going to go home sometime soon, but I'm not sure when. So I asked, he said, what do you do? I said, well, I'm retired. I can do whatever I want. He said, great. Congratulations. I said, what do you do? He says, I just kind of work remotely. I looked at him. He said, if I have to do something, I can just do it on my phone. And I said, working from home? And he says, yeah, that's it. I'm working from home. And he laughs. I said, your boss lets you go camping and you think that he thinks you're working from home? He says, nah, not really. He said, I work for myself. He said, I go to big box stores and I buy stuff and then I sell it on eBay. I ship it via Amazon to people who buy it. Okay, so you're self-employed. He said, yes. So I said, so you're the boss and you're okay working from home like that? He said, exactly. That's fine. That's wonderful. He works for himself and he works for himself, which is fine. He gets a chance to go camping during the beautiful part of the year. But you can't do the same thing on your phone that you can in person. You just can't. Now, this young man probably realizes that and thinks, you know what? I could make more money doing that way, but where's the fun in that? And he even mentioned, I told him, that makes sense. I said, I can't think of a boss that would let you go ahead and work from home while you're camping and working on your phone. He says, yeah. He said, that's really not going to work. He said, he smiled and says, unless you can get away with it. The CEO at Boeing got away with it, but he was a CEO. He didn't report to anybody. I reported to the shareholders, but I'm a shareholder of Boeing, okay? I'm not going to tell him he can't work from home. Nobody's going to tell him he can't work from home. So I have to ask that question. He was a do-as-I-say guy. Look, I'm smarter than you. I'm better than you. I don't need to go into some stupid office in Seattle. I can work from home. And he didn't have his eye on the prize. He didn't have his finger on the pulse. He didn't have the throw in the buzzword you want to use. Old mentor of mine who since passed away, he had a theory he called it management by walking around. He said, unless you walk around, you're never going to know what's going on. You can't read reports. You can't get things secondhand. You've got to walk around and see how things are. And I don't care how good you are, friends, you're not going to walk around working from home. And maybe that's why Boeing forgot how to make airplanes, because the top guy, and Lord knows how many on the way down, worked from home and did just the minimum to not get fired. And then airplanes started falling from the sky. And number 3, another CEO. In fact, Starbucks got a new CEO, okay? Brand new guy. And his name is Brian Niccol. And Brian Niccol, they had to lure this guy away, okay? And part of his contract said, you know what? I don't want to go to Seattle. I mean, all these companies are in Seattle. Nobody wants to go there. He lives in Newport Beach, which is beautiful if you've ever been to Newport Beach, okay? The guy makes over $100 million a year as this new CEO of Starbucks, okay? And if you've ever been to a Starbucks, a lot of people knock Starbucks. I'm not one of them. I'm not a iced half a cup of latte guy, paid $5 for a milkshake with caffeine in it. But I do like their coffee. It's very good. Their Pike Place coffee with a little bit of cream in it is a wonderful drink. It's good. It's not cheap. It doesn't break the bank. It's a little over $3 for a medium coffee, which is more than you're going to pay. But you know what? It's a unique product. It's different from coffee anyplace else. So I'm not a Starbucks hater. I like it. I'll have it a couple times a month, okay? But if you go into a Starbucks, you think, is this a coffee shop, or is this an advertisement for Greenpeace? Because it's green, everything. We're sustainable. We do this. We do that. This is what we're all about. Okay, I thought you were all about coffee, not saving the planet. But the new CEO, Brian Niccol, one of his perks is 3 days a week, he's going to commute from Newport Beach to Seattle via the corporate jet. So the guy running a green, self-effacing company who will do everything to save the planet, to reduce their carbon footprint, to fill in the blank, is going to get on a jet 3 times a week and fly from Newport Beach to Seattle, work his day, and then fly home to Newport Beach. How green is that? Do as I say. Now, you're not going to say do as I say, not as I do, because how many of you, I'm going to venture to guess that there's not one person who's listening to this podcast who flies to work via a corporate jet. Okay. Oh, by the way, the other 2 days, he'll just work from home in Newport Beach. You're being paid over $100 million a year. Is it too much to ask that you live close to the office so you can be there every day? Now, again, he said, well, I'm going to be there 3 days a week, 3 out of 5. And I'm sure that if he's flying, what is it? It's about from Newport Beach to Seattle, it's about a 2-hour flight. Okay. So if he gets on the plane at 5 in the morning, they get him there at 7. Then he comes home at 5 at night, gets home at 7. Okay. That's a long day. 10-hour days. But he's flying home. He's at home every night at Newport Beach. And so he is there with his finger on the pulse 5 days a week, or three out of the 5 days a week. But 2 days he's working from home. I guess in Zoom meetings, okay? The other days, he's on his private plane with just him flying to and from work. How green is that? John Kerry, who's a big green guy, was asked that question because he flies around the world, globetrotting on a private plane. And at least I will give John Kerry this. At least John Kerry was honest. He was asked by a press member, look, you're supposed to be Mr. Green, and you're flying on a private jet. Why don't you fly commercial like everyone else? I will give John Kerry props for being honest. He said this with a straight face. Look, my work is so important that this is what I have to do. I can't fly commercial because the work I do is just much more important than the work that anybody else does. Now, I heard that and I didn't know what to think. First of all, congratulations for being honest. He didn't try to sugarcoat it. He didn't try to spin it. He basically just said, look, do as I say, not as I do, because let's be honest, I'm better than you. You're not smart enough to save the world's problems, but I am. I'm a real smart guy. I'm better than you. I'm richer than you, and I'm more privileged than you. So stop asking stupid questions and leave me alone. You got to give him props for honesty at least, okay? And it seems like that's how things are anymore. It's not, you know what, how would this look if I did this dopey thing? And I know you're not supposed to live your life based on what others think. But sometimes, especially if you're a person who's running the show, a captain of industry, a politician, or a common person with their hand out, you can at least say, you know what, let's consider what others who aren't in the privileged position that I'm in think about this. Because after all, they're going to be the ones fitting the bill. Perhaps a little bit of modesty, maybe more than a little bit of modesty and common sense would pay big dividends instead of just saying, look, do as I say and not as I do. Well, that's it. I'm done. JamesStrongShow@hotmail.com. That's the email address, JamesStrongShow@hotmail.com. Send me emails. I enjoy getting emails, text messages, Facebook stuff, instant messages. I get a lot of those too. However you want to communicate, I'd love to do that. I appreciate it. And tell the folks about the podcast. I appreciate that as well. That's it. I'm done. Until next time, this is James Strong saying adios.